good evening, or good morning, or whenever you're watching this. Good day. I want to put up a little exam 2 review. I know there's been a lot of questions and emails, and I haven't answered a lot of them, or 3 anyway, directly because I knew I was going to do this, and I was just waiting to get around to it. So this will be a review for the exam coming up. This particular exam will have more information and more questions than the last one. Typically the exam's worth 70 points. The last one was 54 points. So this one may end up making up for some of that. So it'll be a longer, and in that sense, because it's longer, more difficult exam. You're talking about digestion and endocrinology or endocrine system as the primary foci, and then you'll have a bit on enzymes, a bit on respiration, and a bit on immune system. So you have 3 smaller subunits as well as 2 large ones. I have combined digestive and endocrine before, but was without the other items. So immunology, just as I mentioned in class, didn't make the squeeze into the first exam. While I will review it right now, it probably will not be extensive on the exam. I'll probably have 3, maybe 4 really conceptual questions. Broad. It'll include aspects of it all, so they're going to be broad, so you'll want to have just really a general understanding and recollection of a few of the details. They're well-worded questions, but just to let you know that of the 70 questions that may be on this exam or so, more of a minority will be on the immune system. But nonetheless, it is important that you understand it, and I do want to answer some questions that you might have tomorrow. So tomorrow we have a case study planned to get us started with the endocrine system and information there. I know I've been late in posting up a recording of the digestive system. I can do that tomorrow. We can review, or I can give the lecture in class after the case study, or I can post it as well just like this. Doesn't matter to me. That'll be fine. So what I want you to think about, if you happen to turn this on before tomorrow night, and I'll ask you in class, is whether you want to take your second test on the Monday we return from spring break. So you basically have this review, you have this week of endocrine, and then you'll have the week of spring break, which technically is maybe off from going to classes anyway. But you can be studying and looking over the material for an in-class exam Monday when we return, or the following or next weekend, a week from today, I can post it up, and you will have the 2 weekend or the week of spring break and the following weekend to get the test done before we return Monday for class to start the nervous system. So you let me know. Do you want to take it over the week of spring break online or in person in class the Monday we return from spring break? All right, with that, let's go through this. So immunity, enzymes, and cell respiration is what I want to point out. Here I don't really want to go a lot into detail with the lymphatic system, important as it is. For the test, on honesty, it's not going to probably get a lot of attention. We do want to know, though, in general, what the functions of the lymphatic system are. So there's a lot of fluid in your body, and there's edema that circulates. Edema is the swelling in these limbs, and oftentimes that comes because fluid is not being reabsorbed either by tissues or the lymphatic system, which is what we're looking at. Okay? So regulation of interstitial fluid volume, about 2 to 4 liters per day. So this is your entire blood supply in one day. That's not a really fast circulation, but for such a slow mechanism without a pumping organ to keep it going, it's really depending on the valves, just like in your veins. If you remember anatomy, veins have valves that keep backflow from falling down. So your lymph kind of has blind capillaries which absorb extra fluid that's been lost at the capillaries in the tissues, and they return that fluid to the heart, pumping it up against gravity. As you see in the regular PowerPoint, this is not the regular PowerPoint, there's an image, and it shows returning to the left thoracic duct. Excuse me, right thoracic duct. Now, This little bit here, absorption of dietary fats, this would be good to note just because it overlays with the digestive system. Fats are too large to pass between capillary cells. They enter the lymph vessels then and small intestine, too large, then to the large blood vessels with lymph. So that's how fats are digested. Lymph system can be used for that. And then immune functions, lymphoid organs filter pathogens from the lymph and blood. So you have a series of lymph nodes along the lymphatic system. As it's returning the fluid is checked. This is one way in which fluid in your body is checked before returning to general circulation. It has left circulation when it exits the blood vessels at the capillaries. Whatever was not absorbed by cells, there might be a reason. So there's good things in there as well as potential bad things. A lot of sometimes viruses and bacteria are just hanging out outside the cells waiting to invade. And lymphatic system is one of those systems that helps to absorb that fluid and get it circulating back up into the heart. But it has to go through a series of these lymph nodes. Okay. And in those lymph nodes, we have several types of leukocytes that play a role in maturation. Hold on, I'm sorry about that. There we go. All right, so coming back, how are the lymphatic and immune systems working together? Well, as I just kind of suggested, since all the fluid that's being returned to your blood circulation goes through lymph nodes, in those lymph nodes, you will find many phagocytes, macrophages, some memory B cells and T cells that are looking for specific pathogens. So they're closely connected structurally and functionally. Lymphoid organs and tissues trap pathogens for immune system. Fine networks of reticular fibers in the lymphoid tissues form nets that trap the pathogens so that leukocytes may interact with them more easily. So yeah, this network, once again, and we'll talk about this possibly here in a second, but lymphoid organs are kind of the house. You have the thymus, and you have where the T cells, which is where you can think of T cells as thymal cells, where they mature and leave circulation. They also hang out there to purify, cleanse damaged debris cells as well as pathogens. So, overview of the immune system. First line of defense, you have your cutaneous membranes, such as your skin, the mucous membranes in your nose, eyes, and any other openings in your body have this mucous membrane. There are surface barriers that block entry of pathogens. You also have cerumen, and that's in your ears. So you have earwax. That's a kind of modified membrane there, but it keeps insects and other pathogens out. If invaders get past this first line of defense, you have a second line, responsive cells and proteins that make up nonspecific or innate. So I want you to see that right here we have in the second line of defense responses of cells and proteins. Look at third line of defense, also responses of cells and proteins of specific. So we have an innate or non-specific ready to attack anything that invades. But after this, there is a third line of defense, which is adaptive immunity. Now, because it's adaptive, it takes a little longer to mount a response. But nonetheless, there are cells as well as molecules, namely proteins, that can help the adaptive, help in the way of adaptive immunity. And this adaptive immunity is the one that has memory. So we will have slides with less writing, I promise. Sorry that my picture here. Keep moving it around. Cells of innate and adaptive immune system. So here we're looking at cells. In the next slide, we will look at those proteins we were talking about as well. So cells of innate and adaptive immune systems. Main cells are different types of leukocytes. So we talked about the agranulocytes and the granulocytes in last unit. Granulocytes are filled with these little granules. So all those white blood cells that had fill at it, neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. That agranulocytes are the monocytes, B and T lymphocytes. This is where these guys will play a bigger role. Phagocytes are big cell eaters. Many cells can function as cells that eat. Natural killer cells indiscriminatorily kill and phagocytize foreign or damaged cells. Neutrophils are those natural killer cells. are also natural killer cells, and macrophages are most active. Natural killer cells are a type of lymphocyte that recognize cancer cells, cells infected with viruses, dendritic cells, and dendritic cells present antigens to the T lymphocytes. Again, we won't be able to get into the details, and I'm not going to test you on the details. It really is fascinating, but these dendritic cells, as well as some of these others, are antigen presenters. They don't kill, but they're more like putting out the APB. You know, they have photographs so that other cells in the body will recognize who these enemies, invaders are. And so once presented to T lymphocytes, then we can begin to mount a cellular attack. So these antigen-presenting cells are pretty important in the immune system, especially in adaptive immunity, such as we're talking about on that end. Agranulocytes are innate, right? Or granulocytes are innate. These are white blood cells that generally that are generally in circulation. We all have them. Anything that doesn't recognize, they will attack. Very general. Adaptive would be more like these dendritic cells, the T lymphocytes that are mature, B and T lymphocytes that are mature. The proteins of the innate and adaptive immune systems. So antibodies are proteins produced by B cells or B lymphocytes, and they function in adaptive immunity. Antibodies are produced, so if we were to go back one slide, when these antigens are presented to certain of the B lymphocytes, then the B lymphocytes will start producing a protein called antibodies, and there's about 5 different antibodies. Antibody D, antibody A, the most numerous, antibody M, antibody G, antibody E, and they'll circulate your body. And these are the ones that from childhood on will circulate to some degree. The more they're used, the more your body produces. The less they're used, or the less often they run into that antigen, the less they'll be made. So lymphocytes that function in adaptive immunity. Complement system functions in innate immunity. This is a phenomenal system. Really complicated, can be confusing. I'll show you a picture of this in a bit. You don't need to know, again, the details of this, but you want to know that antibodies, the complement system, and cytokines are forms of molecular or protein immunity. So diverse group of proteins secreted by cells of both the innate and adaptive. So up here, antibodies, you have adaptive immunity, complement, innate immunity, and the cytokines are both innate and adaptive immunity. So a variety of effects, including regulating development and activity of immune cells, tumor necrosis factor, interferons, big medication in cancer, the cytokines and interferons, cell signalers, part of the molecular cells that are circulating when you're high, when you have cancerous cells. You'll see that these molecules are pretty high in count, but they've isolated these and they've been able to come up with some pretty powerful cancer medication or anti-cancer medication, searching for these. What I was going to say is these are the molecules that rush to areas of infection, again, in innate responses as well as adaptive, that cause inflammation, swelling, and pain. Well, also because all that fluid and all these cytokines are what are actually calling all other cells to the area. Boop, 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 boop. You know, come here, kill this guy. There's molecules. They tag them. All right, so to kind of organize, this, so immune system, you have 2 arms, acquired and innate. All right. If we follow first, the first line of defense, the innate. There's the physical barriers we've talked about: skin, mucous membrane, saliva, flushing action of your urine and tears, stomach acid. All these stop infection before it enters the body by being barriers. It's hard to get by that acidic environment, enzymes in your saliva, things like this. Bloodborne, you have the complement cascade, which we'll show you a slide of in just a few moments, via the alternative pathway. Phagocytes would be the neutrophils, macrophages, basophils, eosinophils, natural killer cells, the leukocytes, in other words, all those white blood cells we studied. So these become the death of dangerous organisms. In general, they do pretty well for recognizing what is you and what is not you, and killing whatever is not you. But obviously, we have disease, we get sick, so sometimes a pathogen will get by all of these barriers, and so other things are needed. So you'll notice this arrow stems from over here. So we have a classical pathway, and this we have a overlap in acquired and innate. The direct killing of bacteria by way of the classical pathway. Before we get to that, let me quickly go through the acquired immunity. There's T cell immunity and B cell immunity. So this used to be called humoral or cell mediated. So you have whole T cells. Each of these are born in the bone marrow and they're released into circulation immature. T cells reside again in the thymus, and B cells will go well, they do begin maturing, in the bone. And they each will go as well to spleen, pancreas to some degree, and to those lymph nodes we talked about earlier. Where when exposed to an antigen, the B cells then turn to lymphoblasts, and they'll turn up plasma cells. They'll begin to divide by mitosis, turn to these large plasma cells whose sole function is to kick out antibodies that are directed straight at that antigen. So now we're getting very specific. Antibodies then aid in the complement cascade as well. There's clonal B cells and memory B cells. So once we make plasma cells, all those plasma cells do is form antibodies. Some of them then divide into clonal B cells, and they just make more memory B cells that can do the same thing. So we have this multiplied effect. So now memory B cells are always circulating, ever present, doing nothing, but they will quickly identify that antigen in the future if you're ever exposed again. Very interesting, because we all get colds. And each year it's a little bit different because viruses and bacteria, they mutate. And so you can never have the same cold twice, and it's a constant adaptation and kind of an evolution of just fighting one season to the next. Each flu shot is an attempt to predict the mutation of the following season so as to help give you some acquired immunity by way of vaccination. Anyway, most things that will affect you once, these memory B cells will remember, and you cannot and will not be affected by them twice. T cell immunity. Whole T cells released into the bloodstream. You have suppressor T cells, helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells. These are the killers right here. They will inject the kiss of death when they bind to that cell, bacteria. I say kiss of death because it marks them for destruction. Death of the body's cells that are infected with the virus or otherwise damaged. So cytotoxic T cells recognize that you have been infected, or you as a cell have been infected. It will kill you. A lot of things to talk about here. AIDS virus is what affects these helper T cells. So when you have the AIDS virus, you gain no memory and lessen the cytotoxic effects of the cytotoxic T cells. Just a quick side note there. So here's that complement system I was talking about here. We have a classical pathway and the alternative pathway. So classical pathway, again, for this you don't need to know the details, so I won't spend very long, but you can look at this picture. Both, whether classical or alternative, that is, whether by way of the acquired immunity or by way of innate immunity, you will end up at this activated protein called C3b. It's a cascading effect, very much like blood clotting, where you need one factor to turn on another factor to turn on another factor. You'll notice it starts here in the adaptive with an antibody. So remember, antibodies are produced by plasma cells from B lymphocytes. So these are memory antibodies that are circulating. So once that antigen presents itself anytime in the future, this antibody will recognize it and bind to it. And it's kind of hard to do what you do as a bacteria or virus when you have these large antibodies attached to you. And what they do is they become sticky, activated, sticky, and they attract these complement proteins, which are ever present in your blood. and they're also not attracted to anything except sticky antibodies. So once an antibody recognizes the antigen, they become sticky, the complement sticks to them, and they're basically marked for death. They cannot affect anything. They become activated C3b, and then become C5b, which leads to another cascade, and you cell lysis, so we basically puncture a bunch of holes into this bacteria or virus, enhanced inflammation, basophils attack it, and we kill off the pathogen. These are some other things that can happen to cells and how they kill as well. Clearance by macrophages is another. So when you're marked for death, which is what this is over here, a macrophage can come in and engulf it and destroy it. All right. So types of immunity. You have innate, non-specific immunity, which responds to all pathogens or classes of pathogen in the same way. So if it's innate, it responds to all of them. You're born with it. It has no exposure to anything else. All it knows is you from not you. And if it's not you, it attacks, and it attacks in the same way, whatever it is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. When it doesn't, your body can go into fever, initiated when these chemicals called pyrogens are released from those damaged cells or certain bacterial cells that instigate it, and the fever is meant to burn off or lower the bacterial count as well as inflammation. It's really your body's response to an invader. It's not the invader making you sick, it's your body making you sick. You might remember that video I posted. The inflammatory response is an innate response when cells are damaged by trauma, bacterial or viral invasion, so on. Actually, I don't really need to read through this. I'm going to finish up the immune system review. I didn't get through all the slides. I'll post up a second one if you'd like. Well, it's up to you whether you want to watch it or not, but I will post it up for the enzymes and such. This one went a little longer than I thought it would. So the innate response, there we go. Cardinal signs of inflammation. This will be on the test. This will be something you need to know if it wasn't already. That is, injured areas exhibit redness, warmth, swelling, and pain. The redness and warmth come from vasodilation, the swelling of your blood vessels, of course, and that all adds pressure. White cells and complement proteins, those cytokines I mentioned, all these things are in response to chemicals released, and that causes fluid buildup, pressure, swelling, and then, of course, pain due to the swelling and pressure on those nervous receptors. Types of immunity, adaptive. Okay, I don't need to, I'm looking through it again, and really just look at this bottom one. Has immunological memory. If it's adaptive, exposures to an antigen is remembered by specific lymphocytes and antibodies. There's a more rapid, efficient response with subsequent exposure, as we were saying before, in the complement system when all the antibodies attach to it quickly and become sticky. That's the more rapid and efficient response we were talking about right in here. All right, so just two more slides here. There are two arms of adaptive immunity, cell-mediated and antibody-mediated. So two types of T cells, helper and cytotoxic, processed in the thymus. So again, link that T cells to thymus, antibody-mediated immunity, humoral immunity, that is, it is in circulation within your blood. B cells and proteins they produce called antibodies, processed in the bone marrow and released into the bloodstream. Generally, T cells, some of them roam throughout your body, in and out of blood flow, in and out of organs and tissues, just seeking anything foreign, just always spot checking for specific antigens. And then B cells are those antibodies that circulate in the bloodstream. These primarily in the thymus and lymph nodes. These can also be in those lymphoid organs, but also the antibodies in the bloodstream. Immunological memory is a key. So active immunity makes antibodies, passive immunity receive antibodies. You want to know this very well for a test. This will probably make its way on the exam as well. So naturally acquired through exposure via infection, artificially acquired through vaccination. These would be active immunity, memory cell formation, and lasting protection. Passive immunity, receive them from someone else. So naturally acquired through passage mother to fetus and breast milk, artificially acquired through injection of antibodies or toxins and venoms. No memory cells formed, no lasting protection here, but it is a form of passive immunity. This would be active. Your body will respond to these kinds of vaccinations as it builds antigens for them. Okay, so big picture is the antibody or the immune system has both physical and chemical barriers, and of those chemical barriers, they are cellular and molecular. In general, that is the only job of the immune system, is to keep the body in homeostasis by keeping foreign invaders out, physically and chemically. And these are just some of the ways they do it. Hope that helps.